ahead and move on to our next story. God. So Khanna had an interview recently with Jen Psaki in reference to how to get voters to come out to support Joe Biden in 2024. Now, the big issue that is being addressed here is the fact that young voters are starting to show disappointment and lack of support for Joe Biden, particularly since the catastrophe with the student loan cancellation. Many more things, right? Not codifying Roe v. Wade, et cetera, et cetera. These are two particular issues that really drove Gen Z to come out to the midterms in November and support Joe Biden, or excuse me, not Joe Biden, but Democrat politicians, so that the Democrats could, gain that lead in the Senate. They did lose the House, so we know how that panned out. And now there seems to be this sense of desperation for other politicians in DC that are Democrats, because they're starting to see Joe Biden might have a big problem on his hands, particularly considering the fact that there are other candidates that are running against him, which do seem to be more appealing, particularly to younger voters. So this is 4 clips. I want to start with this first one, and shout out to Case Study QB for this clip. It says Khanna discusses the lack of enthusiasm from young people as Biden fails on student loan forgiveness. Let's get into it.
It's no secret that young people tend to support progressive causes, and they historically vote for Democrats. That gap has only grown wider after last year's midterm elections. Here are some numbers to chew on. In 2020, a whopping 50% of young people ages 18 to 29 turned out to vote, which was an 11-point increase from 2016.
But let's remember, those people turned out to vote not because they were excited about Joe Biden, but it was because they didn't want Donald Trump. And they were worried about things like student loan debt. And they were worried about things like Roe v. Wade, et cetera. Like, they were worried about those particular issues. So that's why young voters came out to support. It wasn't that they were crazy about Joe Biden. Bernie Sanders actually had captured that youth base, right? And Joe Biden had captured the boomer base, people who were like 65 or 60 and older. So you know that this was fear politics that brought them out, and they still didn't get the things that they were actually, fighting for, championing for. Just have to add that in there because she won't.
And even in 2022, about 27% of voters under the age of 30 cast a ballot during a midterm election, which traditionally have much lower turnouts. That's the highest youth turnout number in the last 30 years.
But remember, they came out in the midterms the way that they did was because of student loan debt cancellation. And of course, also because the Supreme Court did overturn Roe v. Wade. That's what drove them out.
And that made a huge difference for Democrats in swing states. Consider that 70% of voters between the ages of 18 and 29 voted for then Senate candidate John Fetterman in Pennsylvania. Compare that to 55% of voters between the ages of 30 and 40. Overall, 63% of young voters broke for Democratic House candidates in last year's election. Among young voters of color, it's an even bigger margin, 80.
And they still lost the House. So what does that tell you? They still lost the House, and you had Gen Z voters show up in record numbers for midterms, and the Democrats still managed to lose the House.
89% of Black youth, 68% of Latino youth voted for House Democratic candidates, compared to 58% of young white voters. But there have also been a number of crushing blows to progressive priorities in the last few weeks because of the Supreme Court decisions on student loans and affirmative action. So are those decisions energizing? Are they deflating? Where will the blame be placed? And for
the blame needs to be placed at the Democratic Party, and I want to explain why. When it comes to student loan debt, again, I explained to you multiple times on the show that Joe Biden did not follow instructions. He was supposed to cancel student loan debt through the Higher Education Act of 1965. He also could have done this via executive order. He chose to do it through the HEROES Act, which actually made it more difficult. Also, we were not in a state of emergency at that point in time anymore because the pandemic emergency had been lifted by him. Also, there's also the fact that, I'm sorry, he just really messed this up. There's also the fact that in reference to the Supreme Court, Joe Biden knew that this was a possibility that they could come in and overturn it if it was struck down by a federal judge. Now, because he chose to do it the way that he did, that gave a federal judge the opportunity and time to come in and do just that. He also chose to means test canceling student loan debt, which created more paperwork and it takes longer. So there is that piece. You blame the Democratic Party for that. When it comes to the issue in reference to Roe v. Wade, let's go back to President Obama's 2008 campaign. He said it would be the first thing that he would do was to codify Roe v. Wade. And as soon as he was elected, he said that he was not going to make that a priority. Now, there are many excuses that came out about this. There was Lieberman as one of the excuses that we can't do it because of Lieberman. Just like people say now, we can't do something because of Joe Manchin. It's a rotating villain. There'll always be someone. But what they could have done, what Obama could have done, is he could have removed the filibuster. And he chose not to do that either. The Democrats had plenty of time. This could have been done under Bill Clinton. Okay, so this goes way, way back. And they knew there was always a possibility, because it was not codified into law, that the Supreme Court could come in and strike it down. So I blame the Democratic Party for both of those issues. That's who you should blame.
Progressives who are not yet energized by the 2024 election, what will it take to get them there? Joining me now is Congressman Ro Khanna of California, who's been a big champion for progressive causes that young people care about. He's a member of the Congressional Progressive Caucus in the House. He was the co-chair of Bernie Sanders' 2020 campaign. So I want to start by getting your take on something a New York Times analysis piece said about how these Supreme Court rulings offer Democrats a potential way forward. The analysis said, quote, "The court's decision could fuel broader outreach to the working class voters who have drifted away from the party because of what they see as its elitism." Of course,
Pause right here. The court's decision could fuel broader outreach to the working class voters who have drifted away from the party because of what they see as elitism. No. You talk to most working class people, they're not thinking about voting. Most of them are not even watching this. They're not watching mainstream media. They're not, you know why? They're too busy working. They're working 2 and 3 jobs. They're working jobs where they're not even, allowed off by their boss to vote on election day. Let's remember, election day is not a holiday in this country as it is in some other countries like Colombia. So they're actually not thinking about this. I don't know. I don't know what they think this is supposed to be, but let's talk about the elitism piece. The Democratic Party, yes, it is elitist. It is corporate. The DNC itself is a corporation. But does that mean that that is going to push working class people to come out? No. When you make these types of statements, what you tell working class people is that, you know what, this party doesn't care about me. Instead of addressing the fact of younger voters coming out to support the Democratic Party, what should be, I feel, criticized heavily by people like Jen Psaki is the fact that the Democratic Party allowed it to get to be this way. The fact that the Democratic Party allowed it itself to turn into this elitist corporation that's only for people who have graduated from like Harvard and Yale and participate in this type of industry that attracts people like Goldman Sachs. We need to talk about that. So again, that ownership, once again, is on the Democratic Party, not on the workers and not on Gen Z.
You agree with that, but if you do, how do you think Democrats could use these recent rulings to more effectively reach out to working class voters?
Okay, so let's go to clip number 2 where he answers that question here. So let me pause that for a second and bring it on up on the screen.
Well, Jen, the court is moving us backwards, and young people in particular are outraged that the court is taking away the relief of student loans. They're moving to a time where colleges used to be just for the wealthy and largely white. So I do think this can energize young people in particular. On working class voters, I think what the president is doing in Bidenomics and saying, I'm delivering what Trump promised is probably the most effective message we have.
That was not a good answer to that question. Joe Biden has not been delivering in reference to working class people. That's why working class people are still heavily upset with him. That's why his approval rating is what it is. That's why someone like RFK Jr. is polling the way that he is against the incumbent Democrat president. This is why 70% of Democrats don't want Joe Biden to run again. If he was actually delivering for working class people, that percentage would be different. He's not. And Ro Khanna knows this. We've had this discussion on my show. I had this discussion with Ro Khanna on my show. Joe Biden is not delivering. You know, distributing the American Rescue Plan, this one-time plan, that does not change the lives of everyday working class people. That's just a one-time thing. When you don't increase the minimum wage, which was struck down, by the way, 8 Democrats in the Senate voted against a $15 minimum wage. Now, you expect the Republicans to vote against it, but you need to tell me why those 8 Democrats voted against it. And it's not just Manchin and Sinema, obviously, if there were 8. So that's something to think about. The fact that I've showed you with the recent cost of living report, in a majority of the states in this country, you need to make more than $15 an hour just to make a living for yourself, a life for yourself in this country. They don't even want you to make less than that. They don't even want to give you 15. And you really should be getting more than that to even have a 2-bedroom apartment in most states in this country. So he has not delivered for the working class people. A lot of these politicians want to bring up the child tax credit, the same child tax credit that they cut. They stopped early, stopped abruptly. Again, not delivering for the working class people. But Ro Khanna has already had his talking points. He knows what he's supposed to say when he comes onto these shows and he has these interviews. And that's because I believe Ro Khanna himself is getting ready to run for president, probably in 2028. So he knows he has to play the game. Same thing with AOC. That's why she's backing Joe Biden instead of people who are running on progressive policies. They have chosen to be career politicians, even if that means lying to the American people.
So you've said that President Biden should run on term limits for the Supreme Court, something a number of people have called for, a growing number of people. How can you articulate for me, how does he connect something like that may sound a little bit obscure, term limits, to voters and getting them excited about the election and getting out?
So here's my big question. Why do they do this? Why is Jen Psaki asking Ro Khanna how to get young people to turn out instead of asking young people theirself? Have you guys ever noticed that they do this? Ro Khanna, what could be done to get young voters to show up in 2024? How the hell does he know? Ro Khanna's not a young voter. He's a politician. And he's going to say what he needs to say to back Joe Biden. How come you never see them on the street interviewing younger people? Why don't they go to some of these colleges, these universities? Why don't they go to places where some of these younger people are working, like Dunkin' Donuts, Outback Steakhouse? Why don't they interview some of these young people that are working like these 2 jobs and ask them, what would it take for you to come out and vote? And more importantly, why aren't they asking non-voters? Not the people who voted in November, but the people who are younger voters in that age group that they discuss, 18 to 29, that don't vote at all. Why aren't they interviewing those people? And I'm going to tell you why. They don't interview those people because they know what they're going to say and it won't be good for the Democratic Party or their network. Because those people who I have interviewed are going to tell you there's no sense in me doing it because nothing's going to change. Because the Democratic Party has not delivered. So why would I take a day off from work that I'm probably not going to get paid for? Hello. If you worked in the restaurant industry, you know this is true, right? Why should I take a day off from work that I'm not going to get paid for, stand in line for hours to vote for someone who's not going to deliver on the promises anyway? This is why we have more non-voters in this country than we have voters. But she's going to ask Ro Khanna as if Ro Khanna knows. Okay.
Well, voters know that the court is just out of touch with their lives, that the court is taking away their rights, taking away women's rights to control their own body, taking away students' relief in terms of the student loans. The president forgave the loans. The Supreme Court took that money away. And they see these justices, they see all the ethical conflicts, and they're saying, enough with it. Let's have a clean slate. And term limits, by the way, has support not just from Democrats and independents, but also Republicans. And it's something the president's own commission has recommended.
It's not just about the term limits, though, because I want to bring up the bigger issue in reference to the Supreme Court. Now, he says the Supreme Court members, are, they're out of touch. I agree. But so is the Democratic Party. The majority of Americans wanted Medicare for all. Democratic Party says, nah. The majority of Americans want a living wage. Democratic Party says, nah. They're in line with the Republican Party on those two issues. It's just they don't want to give everybody health care in this country. So you have two corporate parties, again, that serve corporate interests, not the interests of the people. So it's not just the Supreme Court. But here's the bigger problem in reference to SCOTUS. You have 9 justices that make decisions for the American people who most of us have never even met. Most of us never hear from these people. Most of us will never ever meet these justices. But they make life-changing decisions for the rest of us, and they have a life appointment. And we don't even get to vote for them. How was this even decided in this country? Let's think about this for a second. Do you think that it is fair that we have people who are hand-selected by other politicians who serve corporate interests to serve a lifetime appointment on the Supreme Court? And they're voting in such a way that makes, changes our everyday life, huge decisions like Roe v. Wade. And we have no say in that process. How do you guys think that's okay? I don't think that's okay. How come we don't get to participate in that process in reference to whether or not these justices should be sitting on the Supreme Court? How come the American people don't get to vote on that? You have a couple of finalists, everybody vote. That is direct democracy, correct? But we have no say so. And they are changing our lives. 9 people, lifetime appointment, and we will never meet these people. Think about that.
Now, you've called for term limits. Former Speaker Nancy Pelosi has called for term limits. As you said, a number of people who aren't even Democrats. You have stopped short of calling for court expansion, which a lot of progressive groups have been calling for. As you've seen kind of these ethics violations and all of the rulings recently, have you rethought that at all?
I've said everything should be on the table, but I was recently watching the FDR miniseries, and I saw that even FDR had trouble with it. And so it's not an easy thing to do. Often people see that it is polarizing or partisan. And I guess term limits is an easier first step that would reform the court, calling for term limits and a judicial code of conduct of ethics. Even Republicans in Congress, if we go out and have someone buy us lunch, the vast majority of us would have to disclose it and have all these ethics rules. I'm just flabbergasted that the Supreme Court doesn't have any of those.
Is he really flabbergasted, though? I mean, Ro, you've been there for a hot minute. This is not something that is new. So let's think about that for a second. I want to go to the third clip here. Ro Khanna discusses the lack of enthusiasm from young people as Biden fails on student loan forgiveness. So wait for this one. Here we go.
You're absolutely right. The limits are so low for members of Congress, anybody who works in the federal government, and this is just a different set of rules. So your fellow Progressive Caucus member, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, has called for Chief Justice John Roberts to be subpoenaed by Congress. Would you support that?
Well, I would support hearings. I think that the Chief Justice should testify. Look, I've met the Chief Justice. I met him a couple of years ago, and he's...
Pause right there. You see the difference between us and them? Ro Khanna said that he met the Chief Justice. You won't. I won't. Think about that. They have access to the justices. This is the difference here.
That he cared about the legitimacy of the court, the legitimacy of democracy. Well, if he cares about the legitimacy of democracy, he should come testify. In past times, Supreme Court justices would meet with members of Congress and the Senate. It used to be common. Part of the whole problem here, Jen, is they're so cloistered. They're so out of touch. They don't have a sense of what life is like. So my plea to him would be, for the good of democracy, come testify. What are you afraid of?
And if he doesn't, would you support issuing a subpoena to get him to testify?
Well, I defer to what the Senate committee, which has that, decides, and I defer to Senator Schumer on that.
That's a no. Of course he would defer. That's his way of basically saying no without saying the word no. He doesn't have the cojones to actually come out and say, yes, I support that he should be subpoenaed. So he's going to defer to some committee.
So let's talk a little bit about student loans, because you've been very outspoken on this for a long time. In the wake of the Supreme Court decision, the administration announced some steps, including repayment plans tied to income, but they didn't announce a pause or an extension of the pause. Do you think the plan that they've announced is enough, or would you like to see them do more?
It's a good first step, but they can do more, and they should do more. I mean, look, I had student loans growing up. I was fortunate to be able to pay them back, over $100,000. I don't think it.
He had over $100,000 of student loan debt, and he was fortunate to pay it back. He mentioned this too when he was on my show. So that tells you how much money Khanna was making. If you're graduating college right now and you have over $100,000 in student loan debt, good luck. Good luck. I know people who are doctors and lawyers that will never be able to pay off their student loan debt. So, yeah.
They should be forgiving loans for people like me who've done well. But we're talking about folks who are largely from working class and middle class families. Under the Higher Education Act, they should at least stop the interest payments. People who were promised this relief shouldn't be having their interest accrue come September until these loans are forgiven. And they should extend the pause. And under the Higher Education Act, even with the debt relief deal, they're able to have a new pause. And I think that would show students around this country, young voters, that we're really fighting for them.
So let me say something here, and then we'll go to the next clip because there's one more, I believe. This issue with the student loan debt is going to be a big problem. We talked about this a couple of days ago. There was a clip of a gentleman I played, a TikTok clip, and he was talking about how this is basically going to be the new housing crisis, because what's happening is there is no accountability on the colleges in reference to the cost of tuition. So they can continue to increase tuition as much as they want. And then on top of that, as the tuition continues to increase, then you have more students taking out more debt. The problem is the wages, number one, have not adjusted for inflation. And then two, the wages that those kids should earn for those jobs that require a bachelor's degree, it doesn't match if you compare it to what our parents' generation was making when they graduated from college and they had jobs where the wages actually made sense and they were actually able to start a life. So there's a difference between someone graduating today and having to take out $100,000 in student loan debt for the same degree that your parents got or your grandparents got, and they didn't have anywhere near as much student loan debt. There's a big difference. And the problem is there's no accountability to the colleges. I know, guys, I worked in higher ed for over 10 years. And I'm here to tell you that college is a business. It's not even so much about you go to the school, you get this degree, you're guaranteed to get this job. No, you're not. You don't even know if that industry is going to be profitable by the time that you graduate after 4 years now. There's also technology that has changed a lot in reference to jobs in this country. So you really don't know. And what I've seen a lot of students graduate with all this debt within the past couple of years, and they're not getting the jobs for the fields that they actually majored in because those companies are not hiring more people because they've been able to replace some of the positions with technology. And for those of you going to these coding boot camps, I got news for you too, because I have friends who are software engineers, and I'm here to let you know. If you think that your safe bet is going to be coding or to be a software engineer, AI can code, boo. It's only a matter of time before that's taken away from people. But the colleges continue to make money, and this is a big part of the problem. They'll continue and to offer majors that they know are not profitable in the job market. So let's go to the final clip here.
As you look to 2024, and as somebody who's been very outspoken on a number of progressive issues and causes, what is your biggest concern looking ahead to 2024? And is there a message you'd like to hear more from Democrats or even the president to get people excited about the election?
The question is, what is your biggest concern? Listen to his response.
Two concerns. One, let's not take young voters for granted. They're never going to vote for Donald Trump or DeSantis, but we need them as energized as they were in 2020, getting folks out to vote. And the issues they care most about are climate. The Willow Glen drilling was a mistake, in my view. Mountain Valley Pipe.
Let's go back. Pay close attention. Number one issue.
Two concerns. One, let's not take young voters for granted.
Vote. His number one concern is getting young voters out to vote for the Democratic Party. Let's all remember that from the same person who considers himself to be progressive, so to speak. That's all they care about. Come out and vote. Pass the Voting Rights Act so you can come out and vote for Democrats. Not independents, though. Not third party. Don't vote for those people. Come only vote for the Democratic Party, and that's it. That's his number one concern, considering what's happening right now in this country. Not the economy, not Medicare for all, which he claims to care so much about. Not those things. Voting. Let's go on.
They're never going to vote for Donald Trump or DeSantis, but we need them as energized as they were in 2020, getting folks.
I wouldn't put that past people, by the way. Never going to vote for Trump or DeSantis. Just because people are young doesn't mean they're going to vote for the Democratic Party. So I wouldn't put that past young people if I were you, Khanna.
Folks out to vote. And the issues they care most about are climate. The Willow Glen drilling was a mistake, in my view, Mountain Valley Pipeline, but we did have the Inflation Reduction Act. But we've got to do far more on climate, and we've got to fight for student loans and student loan relief so they know we're actually trying to improve their lives.
Pause. The Willow Project, which Khanna leaves out, but I think you really need to know, that project was already agreed upon when Joe Biden was running for office, and he said there would be no more drilling. Remember that? Remember that? No new drilling? And then it was revealed, I told you a couple weeks ago, that it was already decided. He had already agreed to do the Willow Project. So when Khanna tells you that the Willow Project was a mistake, it's not that it was a mistake if it was already decided. Joe Biden hasn't backed down on it. Climate activists obviously have been pressuring him, but that isn't going to change his mind because it was already written in stone. So what Khanna should do is just call it like it is and just say it was wrong, not it's a mistake. It was wrong for President Biden to agree on the Willow Project. That's what he should be saying.
The second thing I would say is what the president did in Chicago with Bidenomics. I mean, Trump went around this country saying communities had been left out. People were wronged. And you know what? They were wronged. We had massive deindustrialization in this country. I was just in Lordstown, Johnstown. Some of those places haven't come back. But the president needs to say he's the one, after 40 years, who's righting the ship, who's bringing manufacturing back.
In other words, he wants Joe Biden to say things that's actually not happening. He wants Joe Biden to lie. Remember, Khanna told you all last year, we just got to tell the story better. We have to sell the story. And that's what it's about. He's a salesman. A lot of these politicians are salesmen. That's it. They're just trying to sell you something so that they get your vote. So he believes Joe Biden should just continue to lie to people so that they'll vote for him.
Standing up for the working class. Trump may have expressed grievances, but he's delivering. And I think those two messages combined will give him a decisive victory in 2024.
Congressman Khanna, thank you so much for your time today.
So Khanna believes that all Joe Biden has to do is basically just lie, and that'll give him the victory in 2024, because those things aren't happening that he said. Let's be real. I'll take the comment on Rockfin, Eric. All right. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. SCOTUS is not as powerful as we make them out to be. They have the illusion of power put forth by Congress, who pulled a bait and switch by saying, hey, there's nothing we can do. It is those guys. Don't be fooled. Congress is supposed to be the activist branch, yet they make it seem that way. Why do they do that? Because they know we can't hold them accountable like we can them. So they point us over there. Interesting. Congress has the power to overturn any SCOTUS ruling by making an edit to the law, craft a new law, or introduce a constitutional amendment. Yeah, but they know it's not going to pass, and that's why they're not doing it. Even when it comes to Roe v. Wade, they know it's not going to pass. That's why they're not even trying to do it. Introduce a constitutional amendment to place the 18-year term limits on SCOTUS and apply to SCOTUS the same code of conduct they apply to the lower courts. Matter of fact, let's realize Mike Graval's dream and introduce a national ballot initiative amendment allowing voters to ratify amendments to the U.S. Constitution and pass federal law. Well said. I'm going to go to some of these comments here. Lawrence said, notice Roe doesn't speak to independent media anymore. No, he does. He still goes on independent media. I've still seen him on independent channels. He's gone on channels way smaller than mine, too. I just didn't invite him back on here. Because when he came on last time, he tried to snowball people and gaslight people. And I said, no, I don't need to talk to Roe no more. Smooth says, don't get it. In Canada, we have advanced voting, polls open until 9 p.m., and the right to leave work to go and vote. In big cities, polling is walking distance, no lines, etc. Yeah, well, it's on purpose here because our politicians are bought and paid for. They're hand selected. She's Black says Nancy actually called the judge term limits SMH. Are you kidding me? How long has Nancy been in office? Congress needs term limits. Well said. X Collins says he should have access. He is part of a branch of government. You should also have access. That's the point that I want to get across. We really have to expand our minds here. We should not just tell ourselves, well, this is the way it is, so that's how it is. No, you should also have access because they're making decisions that affect our lives. Oz says the system in the United States is rigged for the corporations and rigged against the people. 100%. 100.